and presented at various national and international in international journals and conferences. He has also participated in pediatric outreach activities. So we have such an esteemed speaker with us today. But before I hand over the spotlight to Dr. Ronak Seth, I would like to request everyone to mute themselves and turn their video off. If anyone has got any questions, can post it in the chat section, which will be taken up later. So over to Dr. Ronak Seth to begin his talk.
Thank you, madam. Thank you very much, IAP Raigad and all the esteemed pediatricians from Raigad and from elsewhere who have joined here for this opportunity. Thank you for the generous introduction, madam. So I am Dr. Ronak Seth. I am. We will go over. Can the presentation be seen? Hello.
Yes, Ronak. Yes, yes. Ronak. Yes, Ronak. Go ahead. Make it full screen. Yes.
Yeah.
Go to play.
Yeah. Yeah. So we will be touching upon pediatric arrhythmias, how to approach them and how to diagnose them in day-to-day pediatric practice. So it is more than 150 years ago that electrical activity in the heart was identified, and there was this elaborate setup required to find out what is the electrical activity of the heart. You can see the gentleman sitting with his hands and feet immersed in a salt solution. From that day to this day, we have moved on, and we are now having portable ECG machines. We are having wearable smartwatches which have ECG compatibility and which can transmit your ECG in real time to your doctor or physician. So we will be going through, in my talk today, we'll cover the normal cardiac electrical physiology and ECG recording, and we'll then move on to steps in interpreting an ECG with specific aspects about pediatric ECG. Then we'll move on to variants and benign abnormalities, which madam said normal, abnormal, or little abnormal. And then we'll move on to bradyarrhythmias and tachyarrhythmias and their management. Lastly, we'll have a few clinical ECG cases where I would want all of you to interact with me. So the normal conducting system of the heart is comprised of a sinoatrial node, which is located at the junction of the superior vena cava and the right atrium. And from there, the impulse which is generated moves on through the internodal bundles into the AV node, from where it goes into the bundle of His and the bundle branches, the right and left bundle branches, and then from there on into the Purkinje fibers of the myocardium. So the pacemaker of the heart is the SA node because its intrinsic excitability is the highest of all the cardiac conduction tissues, and the rate at which it fires is 60 to 100 beats per minute in a grown individual, and it is 90 to 140 in the pediatric age group. Following that is the AV node, whose excitability is little less, and hence it is the backup pacemaker of the heart. And lastly is the ventricular myocardium or the Purkinje fibers, which have a even lesser rate. So we all know this normal ECG, and it comprises of waves and durations and intervals. So we'll quickly go through that. The P wave is formed by the atrial depolarization. The PR segment is formed by the time delay that happens at the AV nodal conduction. The QRS complex is formed by the ventricular depolarization, and the ST segment and the T wave are represent the ventricular repolarization. So what is a normal sinus rhythm? This is a very important aspect. As madam said, whenever ECG is handed to us, and when we want to say whether is this a normal sinus rhythm or is it normal, is it completely normal, can we label it as completely normal? So what all do we want to see when we want to say it is a normal sinus rhythm? So P wave before each QRS. So every QRS has a preceding P wave. The P wave is upright in lead 1 and lead AVF, and the PR interval is normal for age. and the QRS duration is normal for age. If these criteria are satisfied in any ECG, we can say that it is a normal sinus rhythm. So we all know the ECG leads. On our ECG machine, we have 10 leads, of which 6 are precordial leads or chest leads, 3 are limb leads. So those 3 limb leads go to the right arm, and the left foot. And from those 3 leads, we get the 3 standard limb leads on the ECG as well as the 3 augmented limb leads on the ECG. So the axis of lead 1 is from the right arm to the left arm, that is leftward axis, that is labeled as 0 degrees in the standard reference format. So lead 1 is 0 degrees, lead 2 is 60 degrees, lead 3 is 120 degrees. So note that these 3 standard limb leads are at 60-degree angles from each other. Also, then the augmented limb leads, which are derived from these leads, are AVL, AVF, and AVR, which are at -30, +90, and -150 degrees. Then coming to the precordial leads. So the earlier one, the limb leads, gave an idea about the electrical activity in the frontal plane, as seen from the front of an individual. Whereas the precordial leads give an idea about the ventricular voltages or the ECG voltages in the transverse plane, where V1 and V2 are leads on either side of the sternal border in the 4th space. V4 is in the 5th space in the mid-clavicular line. V5 is in the anterior axillary line, and V6 in the mid-axillary line. V3 is placed bisecting the line joining V2 and V4. So then coming to the standard ECG recording or ECG standard calibration of the ECG machine. So the ECG paper in the standard format is designed to move at a speed of 25 millimeters per second. And it is programmed to have a 10 millimeter deflection for every millivolt of voltage that it detects. So for 1 millivolt voltage, it will go 10 millimeters. It will have a 10 millimeter deflection. So this is the standard calibration. We'll come to some examples where we need to change these calibration settings. So the ECG paper, from this we know now that one small square on the ECG paper is 0.04 seconds, and one large square, which is comprised of 5 small squares, is composed of depicts 0.2 seconds. And vertically, one large box is 0.5 millivolts. So now coming to steps in interpreting an ECG. So whenever an ECG is handed to us, we should be very methodical and go stepwise while interpreting. The very first question that we need to answer is whether the rhythm is sinus or not. That is the very first and foremost question that we need to ask and answer. The second question is, what is the heart rate? The third is, what is the QRS axis, whether it is normal or abnormal. Then comes the intervals or durations. And so we go on calculating the PR interval, the QT interval, and the QRS duration. Then we look for signs of chamber enlargement or hypertrophy. And we should be very sure to look at all the 12 leads whenever giving a interpretation of an ECG. So determining the heart rate, as we know from the paper speed of 25 millimeters per second, we get a general rule of thumb of 300. So when you have to determine heart rate for such an ECG, you just count the number of big boxes in between the 2 R waves. So here there are 6 between the 2 R waves, 6 large boxes. So we get 300 divided by 6, which gives a heart rate of 50 beats per minute. But what happens when we get an ECG like this, where the rhythm is irregular and fast and chaotic? To get a heart rate from counting the RR intervals here can give a nightmare. So for that, we have to go by the rule where we know that this one ECG paper depicts 10 seconds of electrical activity, and to get 1 minute of activity, we just need to multiply the total number of beats here by 6. So here we get a heart rate of 198. Then coming to normal QRS axis. So the normal QRS axis is between -30 to +90. So that is the left quadrant. The left quadrant is a normal QRS axis. If the axis is more leftward, it is known as left axis deviation. If it is further rightward than +90, then it is called as, right axis deviation. Then how to determine the axis. So one is the quadrant approach and the second is the equiphasic lead approach. So what do you mean by that? So now we have 3 QRS complexes in front of us, and we can know from these that the first one is predominantly positive because its deflection is predominantly positive. The second is negative, and then coming to the third one where there is equal deflection on both sides of the baseline, more or less equal deflection on both sides of the baseline, that is termed as an equiphasic lead. So whichever lead has such an equiphasic voltage, the QRS axis is perpendicular to that, is the general thumb rule. So suppose this QRS complex is in AVF, then lead 1 will be perpendicular to it. And if the QRS complex in lead 1 is positive, then we can say that the QRS axis is 0 degrees. Then coming to the quadrant approach. The quadrant approach is a much more crude approach to just know which quadrant the QRS axis falls in, but it is a quick way of just determining the quadrant. So if leads 1 and lead AVF have a positive QRS complex, that means that both lead 1 and AVF are positive, and the actual QRS vector lies between these two, and so it lies between 0 to 90, and hence it is normal. So we've gone through what is normal. Now coming to what is abnormal. So arrhythmias are abnormalities of the electrical activity of the heart, which are either due to abnormal impulse initiation or abnormal propagation. Dealing with pediatric ECGs, we have to keep in mind the normal range of heart rates for that particular age and for the particular physiologic state that the baby or child is in at that point of time. So a neonate while sleeping can have a heart rate which is even less than 100 and still can be normal, whereas even a 4-month-old baby can have a heart rate of 220 when the baby is febrile and irritable and crying. So with ECGs, we can identify arrhythmias, we can identify myocardial abnormalities like ischemia and infarction, pericardial inflammation. We can have evidence of chamber hypertrophy or enlargement, and we can get ideas about metabolic disturbances like electrolytes and drug toxicity. So we all have had arrhythmias sometime or the other in our life, but when it comes to being at the opposite end where we have to diagnose and manage them, it makes it even more difficult. So coming to the variants or benign abnormalities, sinus arrhythmia is a benign irregularity of the heart rate. It is a benign irregularity of the heart rate with an acceleration in inspiration, and it is a normal neurological reflex which gives rise to this, where the respiratory center drive affects the vasomotor center and we get a acceleration of the heart rate in inspiration. The characteristics which we have to keep here in mind: all P waves are followed by QRS complexes. All the P waves are identical. There is a constant PR interval, but there is a variability of the PP interval. And this sinus arrhythmia rhythm is very common in adolescents as well as athletes who can have a enhanced vagal tone. So sinus arrhythmia is an indirect indicator of an enhanced vagal tone in an individual. And coming to premature atrial complexes. So these are atrial complexes are those which are originating in the atrial muscle or atrial myocytes, but outside the SA node. So generating from the atria, they follow the normal conduction pathway across the internodal bundle and through the AV node. And hence the QRS complex is similar to the baseline QRS. So here in this ECG, we can see both the 5th beat and the 7th beat are atrial premature complexes. And the QRS complexes there are more or less similar to the baseline complexes. And premature atrial complexes are usually a benign subset and usually do not cause much of an abnormality when they are infrequent. Then coming to premature ventricular complexes, these are those that arise in the ventricular myocardium. An impulse which starts in the ventricular myocardium will then not follow the normal conduction pathway across the AV bundle and the His-Purkinje fiber system. And hence, so the morphology will be different as the conduction will be delayed and it will be a wide and abnormal QRS. And it is also followed by a compensatory pause because the intervening sinus rhythm, sinus impulse will not get propagated because the ventricle will be refractory during that period. So ventricular complexes are also benign when they are infrequent, but when the burden of premature ventricular complexes is significant, then it becomes a cause for concern. And what are complex premature ventricular complexes or complex ventricular ectopy? So these are those complexes which occur on a T wave. Or they are polymorphic or of different morphologies. They come as couplets or in bigeminy, or ventricular complexes which become worse during exercise. These are the ones which are worrisome. Whereas the benign ones are usually monomorphic. They have a single morphology and they are well suppressed actually by exercise and activity. So when do you suspect that these rhythm disorders have to be evaluated in detail? Whenever it is a sustained abnormality or a frequently recurring abnormality, whenever there is a history of non-vagal syncope or pre-syncope, when there are other abnormal cardiovascular findings, when there is a family history of young sudden cardiac death or a long QT syndrome or sensory neural hearing loss or a pacemaker implantation in a family member, or when the patient is an active sports participant. Then coming to bradyarrhythmias. So bradyarrhythmias can be caused predominantly due to abnormality of either sinus node or of the AV node. Sinus node dysfunction means that impulse initiation in the sinus node is hampered, and hence the rest of the atrial myocardium takes over and starts generating the impulses, so which gives rise to a low atrial rhythm, which will have an abnormal P axis or a wandering atrial pacemaker where the P wave will keep on coming from various parts of the atrium. It can also present as a junctional or a nodal escape rhythm. Then chronotropic incompetence is actually when the heart rate is not able to give a response in response to the exercise or exertion. An AV nodal block is of three types. It is first degree, second degree, and third degree. First degree is when it is prolonged conduction time through the AV node. Second degree is when there is intermittent block, and third degree is when there is a complete block. So there are multitudes of causes of sinus bradycardia or a junctional bradycardia outside the cardiovascular system. So primarily respiratory or central nervous system causes or metabolic causes like hypothyroidism, hypothermia, which can give rise to a sinus bradycardia or a junctional bradycardia. And there are many systemic illnesses, predominantly in inflammatory illnesses like myocarditis or endocarditis, rheumatic fever. This can give rise to AV nodal block of varying degrees, and some glycogen storage diseases, which can also present with AV nodal block. Then coming to cardiac cause of bradyarrhythmia. So abnormal development of the sinus node or AV node can be seen in certain congenital abnormalities like left isomerism or a corrected transposition of great arteries, where the AV node or the SA node are abnormally formed. And immune mediated injury is seen in maternal autoimmune disease. So these are the causes of congenital abnormality of the SA node. And injury to SA node or the AV node or their blood supply can happen as a complication of a congenital heart surgery or a transcatheter intervention. And this can also give rise to a bradyarrhythmia. So what is first degree AV block? So here we see that the PR interval is much more than normal. So this PR interval in all the beats is constant. It is not progressively increasing. It is the same, and it is much above the normal limit, which even for adults is 200 milliseconds. So this is known as first degree AV block. So as we saw that there are multiple inflammatory and metabolic conditions which can give rise to first degree AV block. Then coming to second degree AV block. Second degree AV block is when there is a progressive increase in the PR interval. Here you can see in the ECG depicting the PR interval keeps on progressively increasing, and where you are seeing the arrow mark, there the P wave is not conducted down to give a QRS, and there is a dropped beat. So this is known as second degree heart block. There are two types. Mobitz 1 is this one which we are talking about, where there is a progressive increase. The second type is Mobitz type 2, where there is no progressive increase in the PR interval, and there is a unpredictable dropping of the QRS, or a dropped beat comes unpredictably without preceding increase in the PR interval. So this second type, Mobitz type 2, is actually even more dangerous, and it is considered as a high grade AV block. And permanent pacing is indicated for that also. So third degree AV block is complete heart block. So here in this ECG strip, you are seeing multiple P waves. The small triangular ones are the multiple P waves, which are coming at a regular interval. And the RR waves, the QRS waves, are also coming at regular intervals. And there is no relation between the two waves. So that is known as complete heart block. So as we saw, maternal autoimmune disease presenting as neonatal lupus is the predominant cause of congenital complete heart block, and other causes include myocarditis and certain structural congenital abnormalities. And what is the treatment of a hemodynamically significant bradycardia? So the first step would be to ensure that the metabolic parameters are normalized. Temperature is corrected if there is hypothermia, and if there is any other metabolic parameters like hypokalemia or there is hypothyroidism, those can be corrected. The other emergent thing which can be done to support a patient with a significant bradycardia is giving a isoprenaline infusion to temporize the situation till we can arrange for pacing. So pacing can be a temporary subcutaneous pacing or a temporary transvenous pacing. And definitely the definitive line of management would be implantation of a permanent pacemaker in these cases. So pacemaker implantation can be of two types. It can be an epicardial or a transvenous one. The important thing to remember here is that smaller children like neonates and infants will always require epicardial placement, where you have to open up the thorax and the leads have to be placed on the epicardium of the heart. And whereas the transvenous option is utilizable only in children who are more than 10 to 12 kilograms. Then coming to tachyarrhythmias. So the supraventricular tachycardias are the most common form in pediatrics especially, and they are of two. They can be classified as those originating in the atrial and those involving the atrioventricular junction in the circuit. The former one, the predominant ones are atrial flutter, atrial fibrillation, and ectopic atrial tachycardia, whereas those involving the AV junction are predominantly reentrant tachycardias, which include AV nodal reentrant tachycardia and accessory AV pathway or AV reentry tachycardias. So we'll come to various types of supraventricular tachycardias. What is an atrial flutter? So atrial flutter is a macro reentrant tachycardia where the atrial impulse keeps on going in circles in the atria because of areas of variable conductance within the atrial musculature. So an atrial impulse which starts in the SA node will travel along a path, and then which will take a circuitous route and keep on moving circuitously. And they will have a very fast rate. And because of that, the ventricle will not be able to conduct so much. So there will be atrial flutter with an variable AV block. So here you are seeing these flutter waves, these sawtooth like atrial flutter waves, and there are varying, the QRS comes at varying intervals. So this is another grown-up girl with severe mitral regurgitation who had a very huge left atrium. So here also in the rhythm strip below, you can see multiple flutter waves in lead 2. So this is a atrial flutter. What is an atrial fibrillation? Atrial fibrillation is a more chaotic form of atrial tachycardia, where there are small rivulets of electrical activity in the atria without any contractile function. So the atria are in a mechanical standstill with chaotic atrial excitation happening all around. And so in this rhythm, more or less, there will not be an identifiable P wave that we can see in the ECG, or the baseline will be undulating, which will reflect the chaotic atrial activity, and there will be QRS complexes which can come at irregular intervals. So this will be an irregularly irregular heart rhythm with no discernible P waves. Then coming to this supraventricular. So this here we see a 12 lead ECG which is showing a regular narrow complex tachyarrhythmia in a small infant. So now there is one clue in this ECG which says that this is having some specific features. So in the middle of the ECG, you can see that there is one sinus beat there. So that is an indicator that this patient is having the tachycardia in the initial part, having one sinus beat in between, and again drifting into the tachycardia. This is a feature of ectopic atrial tachycardia. So then we come to the supraventricular tachycardias of the reentrant types, that is the atrioventricular reentry and atrioventricular nodal reentry, that is AVRT and AVNRT. So what happens in these is that there is an extra conducting accessory pathway from the atrial to the ventricle. This can either be inside the AV node itself, which is known as the AVNRT, and when it is outside the AV node in the periphery, it is known as atrioventricular reentry. So AVRT is the most common form of supraventricular tachycardia that we see in pediatrics. And what happens because of this extra conducting pathway is that here you can see in the image here the ECG which shows this slurring of the initial part of the QRS wave. So we see the P wave followed by a very short PR interval and a slurred upstroke of the QRS, which is known as the delta wave. This is known as Wolff-Parkinson-White syndrome. It is an indicator of atrioventricular reentrant tachycardia. And this happens because of the short circuiting extra conducting pathway, which starts conduction somewhere in the periphery of the ventricular myocardium earlier than the AV node itself. So this ECG here, again, it is showing a very narrow complex regular QRS tachyarrhythmia. So this patient presented with an ongoing tachyarrhythmia, very fast rates. And what happens after we treat this, when we have treated this and broken the tachycardia, what we see in the sinus rhythm ECG, you can see by the circled marks that there is a slurred QRS, that is the delta wave. And that is how we confirm the diagnosis of WPW syndrome in this patient. Permanent junctional reciprocating tachycardia is a rarer form where the re-entry circuit is in relation to the AV node itself. So the impulse keeps on circuiting around the AV node, and it is a very bad tachycardia to have because it is very difficult to break and it can go on for a very long time. So then coming to ventricular tachycardias, the tachycardias which arise in the ventricular myocardium without involving the without involving the atria or the AV junction. So these are relatively uncommon in the pediatric population. Major causes are electrolyte abnormalities, when there is a repaired congenital heart disease, myocarditis, or myocardial ischemia. So this is one such ventricular tachycardia with very wide QRS complexes. This is very easy to identify this tachycardia, but this tachycardia will not give us any time to act. Whenever there is a ventricular tachycardia, the impulse initiates in the ventricle myocardium, and because of the dysynchrony and abnormal conduction, it will quickly push the patient into a cardiogenic shock. Then there is Torsades de Pointes. So this is seen most commonly in long QT syndrome patients who are having either a congenital long QT or an acquired long QT because of drugs. And when it degenerates into a ventricular tachycardia, it presents as a Torsades de Pointes, where there is a shifting of the QRS axis with time. So this is one example of a patient who developed non-sustained ventricular tachycardia. As you can see, so many runs of wide QRS complexes where there are 4, 4, 5, 5 bunches of ventricular complexes which have happened after a procedure which was for this patient actually had a hypertrophic obstructive cardiomyopathy, and he underwent a alcohol septal ablation for that, and following the procedure he developed this ventricular tachycardia. So when we are initially speaking about the ECG calibration and the standard ECG speeds, we saw that the normal ECG speed is 25 millimeters per second. And so when we are encountered with a very fast tachycardia where we want to bring out the P waves and bring out the small changes and look out for these waves, we can increase the paper speed and make it 50 millimeters per second so that it brings out all these P waves, as you can see in the ECG on the right, where all the flutter waves, atrial flutter waves, are unmasked. Then coming to the therapy of tachyarrhythmias, the first and foremost thing to assess is whether the patient is hemodynamically stable or unstable. If the patient is unstable, we would want to straight away proceed with synchronized DC cardioversion. And when the patient is stable, it gives us more time. So the first thing that we need to do is get a complete 12-lead ECG during the tachycardia, which can give many clues regarding the diagnosis, as we saw for the ectopic atrial tachycardia. Then second thing that we want to do if the patient is stable is perform a vagal maneuver. So vagal maneuver can be done by putting an ice bag on the face, or by inserting a rectal temperature probe, or by bearing down like a Valsalva maneuver. Older children who are having recurrent episodes of these tachycardias, they sometimes get used to doing a pharyngeal gag or inducing vomiting, or even having a headstand that is completely inverted position. So these are the maneuvers which will enhance the vagal activity and which will break the tachycardia by slowing down the atrial conduction. And the next step is to administer IV adenosine. So administering IV adenosine can slow down the conduction through the AV node and therefore interrupt the re-entry pathways around the AV node and thus restore the rhythm. And it is most likely to be effective in supraventricular tachycardias, Hence, in all supraventricular tachycardias, when the patient is hemodynamically stable, the first pharmacotherapy or pharmaco maneuver that we want to do is to give IV adenosine once the vagal maneuvers are not satisfactory. So how do you give IV adenosine is something which requires skill and which requires some degree of fine tuning, because unless it is given properly, it is unlikely to be effective. So what we need is first thing that we need is a large bore centrally located venous access. And we need this arrangement like shown in this picture, where a three-way is attached to the IV line, and on both sides the smaller syringe is having the adenosine drug, and the larger 20 ml syringe is having saline flush. So the way of giving IV adenosine is by giving rapid bolus followed immediately by saline flush, and it is better to give in a very centrally located venous access so that it quickly reaches the circulation and the heart. The dose is 0.15 milligram per kg in infants, and maximum dose is up to 0.3 milligram per kg. And adenosine may cause transient abnormalities like bronchospasm, dyspnea, cough. But more or less, it is a very safe drug because it has a very short half-life. Within a matter of 5 to 10 seconds, the drug is cleared from the circulation. So adenosine effect on a regular narrow QRS tachycardia can be either there can be no response. So this can be seen when there is an inadequate dose of adenosine or ineffective delivery when this method of giving adenosine is not properly followed. Second is it can terminate the tachycardia. So all re-entrant tachycardias like AVRT, AVNRT will get terminated. The third thing that is possible is gradual slowing followed by re-acceleration. This is seen in ectopic atrial tachycardias or junctional ectopic tachycardias. And the other possibility is the tachycardia persists, but there is a AV block, so that on the ECG, we don't see any QRS complexes, but we see a lot of P waves. So that is when it unmasks a atrial flutter or an ectopic atrial tachycardia. So this is a patient who presented with this very fast, regular, narrow QRS tachycardia. And then IV adenosine was administered. And following that, what we see is that there is a breaking of the tachycardia. The tachycardia breaks. There is no undulation of the baseline. There is no sawtooth waves or no P waves of no persistent P waves during this pause period. There are some recovery of the ventricular contraction with these QRS complexes, which we see during the break. So brief pause, no flutter, no ectopic atrial tachycardia, and then recovery to sinus rhythm. So this is how IV adenosine can be used. Very important to have a continuous ECG recording of a rhythm strip to record all these changes, because some of these can be of a diagnostic significance. So narrow complex tachycardias, the management is predominantly vagal maneuvers, adenosine, then beta blockers, amiodarone. Then of late, ivabradine has been used in some automatic tachycardias, and shock, DC shock. And so coming to unstable tachyarrhythmias or those which are refractory to pharmacotherapy, we need to have a cardioverter defibrillator with us, and we should give a synchronized DC cardioversion using this machine. So initially we would want to have select the voltage that we want to give, and then charge, then appropriately position the paddles on the patient's chest, ensure that we are having no contact in conduction with the patient or with the patient's bed, and then deliver the shock. So amiodarone, which is used for refractory supraventricular tachycardias as well as for ventricular tachycardias, it inhibits adrenergic stimulation and decreases AV nodal conduction. It is a generalized decrease. It is a generalized. It causes a generalized decrease in the conduction across the cardiac conduction system. The onset of action when started orally is 2 to 3 days because it has a very long, very large volume of distribution. So what is done is in an acute tachycardia, we give IV loading of amiodarone followed by a continuous infusion till we get a resolution of the tachycardia, and then shift to oral maintenance dose. Very important to have a baseline thyroid function and a routine follow-up thyroid function evaluation because amiodarone is associated with thyroid toxicity. And these are some of the drugs which are used for chronic arrhythmia control in patients who are at risk of repeated tachyarrhythmias. Beta blockers being the most safest and most commonly used ones, along with amiodarone and digoxin. So with that, I come to wind up this talk with some interesting clinical cases of ECGs, and I would appreciate if all of you could participate with me and interact with me through the chat box. I'm trying to get the chat box here.
रौनक इज चैट बॉक्स ऑन द बॉटम
या
हाँ बॉटम में है देखो पार्टिसिपेंट चैट शेयर स्क्रीन जा था ना
हाँ
वहीं पे है
ओके या आई गॉट इट
राइट
ओके so again I'll go to share screen and
right
I'm not when I start sharing the screen I'm not seeing the chat box somehow.
Will you read? I will read it for you. The answers. Okay.
Dr. Ronak, you
Yes.
click that when your presentation is on, you
Yeah.
just click the chat. It will
Okay.
appear as a square, and then just shift it as per your convenience.
Okay.
You got it? Now
Yeah.
you're able to see?
Yeah, I'll.
Chat box is in front of you. No, let it your screen share. Let it be.
Yeah. Now I got the chat box, and I'll go to play.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now it is there.
The chat box you can keep at your convenient place, so it will not
hamper.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll go forward.
Yes.
So this is a 4-month-old baby who is admitted with a bronchopneumonia and is very tachycardic. And this ECG that was taken, the machine interpretation of it is supraventricular tachycardia. What are the inputs from all of you? What do you think? Sorry.
एक minute. It seems to be sinus tachycardia because all P waves are morphology is same and is almost like a regular interval QRS complexes are there.
So good. So that is, thank you for the answer. So here when we see many of the leads are not showing a proper P wave, but when we look at lead 1, we can see a clear P wave before the QRS and constant PR intervals. And there is no doubt here that, this is because the child is febrile and irritable, or this is a normal physiologic tachycardia due to the illness. So
Dr.
coming to this,
Rajesh Shah answered this also, sinus tachycardia.
great. So thank you for the participation, everybody. Coming to the second case. So this is a 7-year-old girl. She underwent tetralogy of Fallot repair 3 years ago in a large government hospital, and since then has been lost to follow-up. Now she presents with multiple episodes of syncope over the past 1 week.
AV block, complete AV block seems to be.
Yes. So what we see here is a multiple P waves. In almost all leads, the P waves are clear. So there are almost 3 to 4 waves, 3 to 4 P waves before each QRS. And also look at the QRS. The QRS is very wide because this is a very low ventricular escape rhythm with a very low heart rate of 40. And so this child has presented with what is known as Stokes-Adams syndrome.
Right.
So coming to the next question. So this baby was with the mother's bedside. This neonate was with the mother's bedside. Near term 2.3 kilo baby was suddenly noticed by one of the residents to have a heart rate of 90 and was shifted into the NICU. And ECG was taken, and this is the ECG. Any ideas?
13 AVF.
We don't have a complete 12 lead ECG here, as is commonly the case. We have only leads 1, 2, and 3.
Don't think 90 normal. It can be just an normal bradycardia.
Yes.
Bradycardia.
So this is a sinus bradycardia in a normal neonate. When the neonate was sleeping, the rate was going to 88 and 90, but when the neonate was waking up, it was going to more than 100.
Right.
So this is a sinus bradycardia. Most of the times, nothing needs to be done for this besides observation, and the baby can continue normally. So now coming to the next case, another neonate with a bradycardia. This is a term normal delivered baby, 2.4 kg at 24 hours of life in the NICU. And the pulse oximeter is showing a heart rate of 70 and saturation is 99%. There is no respiratory distress, no cyanosis, and baby is active and feeding well. And this is the ECG.
Charge is 75. It is a bradycardia only. Again, 1, 2, 3.
Okay.
1, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4.
Any other inputs from any other members?
P waves are normal.
Dr. Bhandarkar sir is actively participating.
मैंने पढ़ा है कल 2-3 दिन से.
One input is bundle branch block. So yeah, any other inputs?
It can be this congenital block also due to this mother having some rheumatological disorder.
Yes, okay.
Possibility, or hypothyroidism also another possibility.
Okay, so here what this is a very tricky scenario. So another input has come on the chat box. QRS morphology is not same in all the QRS. That is correct, and that is a good observation. What we are seeing here, we are being misguided possibly by the pulse oximeter showing a heart rate of 70 per minute. Now, if you see the ECG, we are having here a P wave, followed by a QRS, which is a normal narrow QRS, and this PR interval is normal. We see the start of a T wave, and here again we see another complex, which is little wider than this, but which is still a QRS complex. And the same thing keeps on repeating on and on and on. There is no progressive increase in the PR interval from here to here to here. So what we are seeing is one sinus beat followed by one ventricular ectopic, one sinus beat followed by one ventricular ectopic. And so on, which is known as bigeminy. So this is known as a ventricular bigeminy. So the actual ventricular rate of this baby is 140 per minute. But since the pulse oximeter does not pick up this smaller pulse, it does not count this pulse as a pulse because it is a premature complex and the cardiac output during this beat is lesser. The stroke volume is lesser. So the pulse oximeter doesn't pick it up, and this one is presented as a heart rate of 70 on the pulse oximeter. So when you auscultate the patient, we will get a normal heart rate of 140, but we will get this abnormal rhythm. So that is this case. So this one was at 24 hours of life, and very frequent ventricular ectopics. But when we followed this patient for 1 week, all the ventricular ectopics disappeared, and this baby went into a normal sinus rhythm with very infrequent ventricular ectopics, as you can see here. Then coming to the next one.
Sir, what is the cause and treatment then?
Yeah, so the cause is so the cardiac conduction tissue normally develops as it normally is developing. There is a failure of some part of the myocardium to regress in its excitability. So that is why actually premature atrial complexes, premature ventricular complexes are some things which are very commonly seen in neonates. But as the baby grows, if there is no other abnormality, if there is no abnormality of perfusion, the baby is maintaining normal perfusion and urine output and activity levels. We just need to observe this baby. When some sort of complex ventricular ectopy, like we saw earlier, when there are couplets, or when there are two beats coming together, or when there are varying morphologies of QRS. Now here, when we saw all the ectopic beats are of same morphology. So this again is a pointer of its benign origin, suggesting that there is only a single focus in the ventricular myocardium which is repeatedly getting excited because it has failed to regress in its normal excitability in the course of development, in the course of fetal development. And nature takes its course, and over the following period of days or weeks, most of them revert to normal sinus rhythm.
So thus we have to ignore it.
Yeah, we have to be watchful for signs of decompensation, because when there is such a high arrhythmia burden, there can be some degree of ventricular dysfunction along with it. But most of the times the course is benign.
So observation, and in our clinical practice at the periphery, how
Yes.
do we pick up these then without ECG? We will not be able to pick up them.
So yeah, so when we auscultate the patient, this patient will have a coupling of the heartbeats. So we will get two together, and in groups of two. That is why it is called as a bigeminy. So sometimes on auscultation this is picked up, sometimes on an ECG, sometimes on a pulse oximeter. This can be picked up. So then coming to this neonate with a tachycardia. So this neonate is a 3.2 kg term neonate. On day 3 of life is suddenly appearing dull and not feeding well. And somebody auscultated and said that the baby is tachycardic and pulses are feeble. Saturations are good, no respiratory distress or no cyanosis. And this is the ECG that we got. So how shall we identify this rhythm and how shall we manage this? So again, here we have only a few leads of the ECG. We have not got a complete 12 lead ECG, but that is most often, this is a real world scenario actually, where we sometimes do not get all the leads of the ECG. Any ideas as to what rhythm this is? And how do we go about managing this patient? This patient has has a lethargy and is not feeding well, newborn baby, and has significant tachycardia. So here, I think
T-wave inversion is there.
yes, T-wave inversion is there. Good observation. Anything else? Going stepwise in our interpretation of the ECG.
This.
Yes, so stepwise, the first question that we need to answer is whether it is sinus rhythm or not.
P wave is not seen.
Yes. So that clinches the diagnosis when we say that the P wave is not discernible in this ECG. So and so many small waves or deflections are seen, but many of them are just artifacts. And we need to be very sure when taking the ECG that the baby is calm and not crying and not moving. Otherwise, all these artifacts can can give a false feeling of a P wave. But here, as rightly identified by Madam, there are no discernible P waves. So all the diagnosis has come from Dr. Rajesh Shah as SVT, which is correct. And how do we go about managing this patient? So being a neonate, to perform a vagal maneuvers is little less feasible, but so we go to adenosine. Yes, so this is adenosine was administered to this patient, and here we can see the breaking of the tachycardia followed by a brief pause, and then this is known as a chemical cardioversion with IV adenosine, and the patient has regained the normal sinus rhythm.
There will be an underlying cause for this, right?
Yes, so this is a supraventricular tachycardia. Although here in the sinus rhythm ECG we are not seeing this is the baseline sinus rhythm ECG of that patient after the tachycardia got converted to sinus rhythm. So here we are not seeing a clear-cut delta wave which can give a diagnosis of WPW syndrome, but the age group of being a neonate is very consistent with a diagnosis of atrioventricular reentrant tachycardia, which is common in the neonates and infants. So there is a abnormal conduction bundle besides the AV node, which conducts impulses from the atria to the ventricle, and then they establish a reentrant circuit, and the conduction manifests as supraventricular tachycardia. What we see commonly is that as these patients grow up, many of them are likely to grow out of their tachycardia, so they require to be maintained in sinus rhythm, or we require to avoid future attacks of supraventricular tachycardia by giving some medications which can reduce or which can significantly slow down conduction along the AV node. So coming to the next case. So this is a 12-year-old girl who came with syncope at afternoon 2 p.m. after playing with her friends. Any ideas as to what this is?
Prolonged QT syndrome है ये.
So that is a very very good input of a prolonged QT syndrome, which always needs to be ruled out in anybody who is presenting to you with a syncope. So we should definitely look very carefully at the ECG and rule out a long QT syndrome. So here, one of the thumb rules for having a long QT is that the T wave goes beyond half of the RR interval. That means it should occupy more than half of the space in between two QRS waves, which we are not seeing here.
Okay.
So by general thumb rule, we would say that the QT interval here is normal, although the accurate way of doing it is with sitting down with this ECG and actually calculating manually the QT interval and then correcting it for the heart rate. by calculating QTC. So that is the elaborate way, but this is a general thumb rule which we can use to identify quickly whether we are suspecting any long QT. So now, this is the setting is a adolescent girl with a syncope which happened at afternoon. This is a scenario where there is a possibility of a vasovagal syncope, and that is what we are seeing in the ECG is also a benign sinus arrhythmia. We are seeing a yes. So we got somebody who is saying sinus rhythm. Yes, so that is right. Sinus rhythm is right. It is sinus rhythm, but there is some degree of variability or irregularity which is physiological due to a high vagal tone. Okay, so coming to this ECG, this is a patient whose father also had a heart defect, and now this patient has presented with syncope.
Inverted P.
Yes, so that is a wonderful observation. Straight away, within no time, madam has identified this, that we are seeing a inverted P wave in lead 2. And actually, if you see the entire rhythm strip of lead 2
yes,
below, we can see that the P wave is having multiple morphologies. So here, what we are dealing with is a some abnormality of impulse initiation from the sinus node, because the sinus node is not initiating any impulse. The other atrial muscle is initiating it, and this is what is known as an wandering atrial pacemaker. And so this, when we got the detailed history, the parent also had an ASD, and the parent also had a sick sinus. And so this patient is also having a sick sinus syndrome. So then coming to this 4-month-old child who is very sick and in the pediatric ICU with hypoxic respiratory failure, and we see a irregularity of the heartbeat. We take a ECG to see what it is, and this is the rhythm. Somebody has given us some clues by pointing out with pen marks what we are looking at. So here, this is what we call as a second degree AV block.
Okay,
So here we are seeing
increasing PR.
Yeah, so here we are seeing this PR interval increases here, and here it gets dropped. So here, accordingly, we keep on seeing this. So it is this child was very sick and hypoxic and acidotic. So abnormalities of AV nodal conduction are very commonly seen in such severe metabolic disturbances also. So now this child is a 12-year-old boy with an asymptomatic acyanotic congenital heart disease. So this patient gives a history of a congenital heart disease, but he says that he has never had any symptoms and is fine, completely fine. But when we examine the patient, we find a certain degree of irregularity. So we take an ECG, and this is what we find. So any inputs as to what this can be? So I would request all of you to focus on lead V1.
Okay.
And see and look, try to see whether this is a sinus rhythm, whether every QRS has a preceding P wave.
Abnormal hai. Sinus rhythm is not sinus rhythm.
So it is not sinus rhythm.
Sinus rhythm. I think it's heart block.
Yes. So
heart block.
So every QRS does not have a preceding P wave, the number of P waves are more than the number of QRSs. So that means more impulses are being formed in the atria and less are getting transmitted to the ventricle. More or less, the QRS interval is constant. Besides these ventricular different morphology QRSs that we have. So this is a rhythm which is a complete heart block, where the atrial rate and atrial rhythm is completely dissociated with the ventricular rhythm. So here all these P waves are marked and they are at a very constant interval. So this PP interval is completely constant all through the leads. All the P waves are marked here.
Yes.
So this is a, and so now this, what is the congenital heart disease that this patient has, which is completely asymptomatic without producing any symptoms. This child has lived for 12 years and will live for many more. So something called as corrected transposition of great arteries is when there is atrioventricular discordance, so that the right atrium connects to the left ventricle and the left ventricle again connects to the pulmonary artery. So there is ventricular discordance and they are very prone to develop a atrioventricular block because the atria and ventricle are misaligned. That causes a abnormal development of the AV node. And so as these patients grow, they are at a risk of developing complete heart block. So otherwise the circulation will be normal, the saturation will be normal. If there are no other associated abnormalities, a CTGA can live up to adult life. But they are at a risk of heart block. So, and now, so this rhythm, if we can identify this rhythm, anybody?
This rhythm.
Will everybody agree if I call it a sinus rhythm?
No.
Lead.
There is no P wave preceding every QRS complex.
Okay, let's see that. Lead 2 here has a QRS and here is the P. Again P and QRS, P and QRS, P and QRS, P and QRS.
60. Heart rate to 60, around 60 is heart rate.
Yes, so heart rate is around 60.
60 and almost it is like a regular heart rate. There is no very much variation is there. Beat to beat variation is not there.
Yes.
So sinus bradycardia.
Sinus bradycardia is one possibility.
Bradycardia is there. And
definitely. Yes, bradycardia is there.
What is patient age? Age and other thing?
Patient's age is 6-year-old girl.
6-year-old girl, asymptomatic.
And bradycardia. But then when you ask the patient, she says that she has undergone a heart surgery previously.
Okay, bradycardia post-op है तो damage से if damage sinus SA node, it is another possibility, or some sick sinus syndrome we can say.
Yes, but the P waves are fairly regularly coming. So what would be abnormal in this ECG besides the we are seeing that the rate is definitely low. What else is abnormal? If we can pick that up, we can clinch the diagnosis.
These QRS complexes are almost
PR interval is prolonged.
Yes. So here I will give a clue that the clue is to have a look at all the 12 leads before jumping to the diagnosis of sinus rhythm. So there are a few leads which are showing the abnormality, the others are not showing that abnormality.
1, 2,
V2, V1.
Yes, good, very good. So this is a good pickup here.
Inverted T.
Yes, so lead V1 and lead V2 here are showing, if we carefully see here, so this is one P wave.
Yeah.
There is one small deflection here where the pointer is.
Yes.
Inverted delta hai.
Accordingly, there is one small deflection here. And here, accordingly, there is one small deflection here.
Right.
Same thing here. corresponding here. So V1, V2, V3 here are picking up the extra P waves which are not getting conducted down.
Okay.
Okay.
So these P waves are conducting and this one is not conducting. So this is another heart block.
That block.
Hmm.
After which surgery is very common, this heart block.
So this is congenital heart surgery is most commonly what we see is a VSD surgical closure and a tetralogy of fallow repair.
Hmm.
But these are the common scenarios in which we will find a post-operative heart block because the numbers of VSD and TOF repair are very high.
more.
Yeah, if we see all VSDs, possibly less than 1% will develop any rhythm issues. If 100 patients are operated, less than one maybe will have a rhythm issue. But overall, if we see in the general population, VSD and TOF repair will be the common surgeries.
The right atrium handling during surgery is very common with this heart block.
So right atrium, yeah. So
Right.
handling of the atrium and handling of the superior vena cava, right atrial junction, or pulmonary veins and left atrial aspect is very common in sinus venosus ASD surgical closure and also in TAPVC repair. So when pulmonary veins are redirected to the left atrium, that time there is a handling of a SVC-RA junction, and that can give rise to a abnormal sinus node function in the post-operative period. So again, now I'll come to this one. This is another patient post tetralogy of fallow repair, and again here what we are seeing is a progressive increase in the PR interval. Here we can see the PR interval is huge, and following that this P wave is not conducted here.
Right.
It gets dropped. So this is also another second degree AV nodal block.
AV nodal block.
So this, now coming to the last case with which we will end the session. This is a 2-month-old child who presented in congestive cardiac failure. Heart rate varied from 250 to 290 per minute since admission, and the admitting physician has tried all sorts of things. He has tried adenosine, he has tried amiodarone. Nothing seems to be working on this tachycardia, and he has also got an echocardiogram done to find out what is going on. And echo says that the coronaries are normal, and the left ventricle ejection fraction is 10%. The coronaries are normal because we want to rule out a Al-Kappa or a abnormal origin of left coronary when there is such a low ejection fraction in a small infant. So, but coronaries are normal, but still the left ventricular contractility is markedly depressed with an ejection fraction of only 10%. And this is the tachycardia.
This is a tachycardia induced cardiomyopathy.
Superb. So this is known as a tachycardiomyopathy, where there is an incessant tachycardia going on for a long time. And the clue here to the diagnosis is the variability of the heart rate from 250 to 290, which is seen very commonly in a ectopic atrial tachycardia, where there is an ectopic atrial focus which is incessantly, continuously firing. So, and it is sometimes it is very refractory to treatment, and it often presents in such a very critical state with congestive cardiac failure. And so what should be done when we have not having no response to adenosine?
Ablation. Radial ablation is the treatment of choice in this patient.
Yes, so definitely a catheter ablation is a treatment of choice, but considering the age of the patient, 2-month-old neonate, to go for a catheter ablation.
You can go for space making also.
Yeah, so will be a very, very challenging scenario with a 2-month-old child to have a catheter ablation. So in the meantime, when the child is decompensating in our ICU and we need to break this tachycardia, the thing that can be done is giving a continuous infusion of amiodarone.
Right.
And as somebody has also pointed out, beta blocker infusion can be tried, which will definitely reduce the ventricular rate and which will although we have also to consider that this patient is already in cardiac failure, and so we have to be very careful with dosing of beta blocker, and having a short acting beta blocker like an esmolol will be preferable here, so that we can also monitor cardiac function, cardiac contractility, at the same time try to inhibit AV nodal conduction to get the heart rate down. Another thing is to give a continuous infusion of amiodarone, and so this patient, almost after more than 24 to 36 hours of amiodarone loading, this patient had a slowing of the rhythm, and then underwent a DC cardioversion and had a recovery from the tachycardia. Recovery from the tachycardia was there, but then what happens to the ventricular function is it takes a little longer to improve and come back, sometimes days to weeks, and sometimes weeks to months.
Okay.
So with that, I wind up this talk. I'm thankful to all of you for your attention, and any queries or comments are welcome.
Some question is there,
Thank you,
Ronak.
sir. Yeah.
What are the common, how the, almost all you are shown on the cases and know the presentation. The first, or what are the symptoms in arrhythmia? Right. Some brief.
Yeah.
How the patient presents.
So bradyarrhythmias or low heart rates can present with something in a small infant, can be lethargy, can be poor feeding, or can be a poor perfusion. If as we saw a patient with a very low heart rate of 40, they can present with syncope or a pre-syncope. And coming to tachyarrhythmias, so tachyarrhythmias in a small infant can again present with either poor feeding or lethargy, and if at all feeble pulses and poor perfusion, poor urine output in the sick state. In an older child with tachyarrhythmia will actually complain of palpitations, and they can be these can be the
Syncope is a common symptom in older children.
syncope is a very common symptom in adolescents. So
Okay.
adolescents, more than 10 to 15 years of age group, these are the common age group for having syncope. Many of them can be vasovagal or neurocardiogenic syncopes. Some of them can be pathological, as we saw during our talk.
And another most important thing, many times the patient is asymptomatic and your heart rate is not matching with your clinical diagnosis, right? There is another very important clinical feature or on physical examination, which will suspect something else is there. That is very important in bradycardias.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, another question is there, right? How common is a sudden death? That sudden, we know on which are the clinical conditions, right? Where sudden death, sudden cardiac death in a pediatric age.
Yes, so sudden cardiac death is seen if we consider the arrhythmia aspect of it. One of the commonest things to give rise to sudden cardiac death is a long QT syndrome. So long QT syndrome can be either autosomal dominant or autosomal recessive. They can be having an associated history of sensory neural hearing loss, which is seen in Jervell-Lange-Nielsen syndrome. And so these are the ones which can rapidly, these long QT syndromes can rapidly deteriorate, rapidly degenerate into a ventricular tachycardia or a ventricular fibrillation. And many of the times before the diagnosis is achieved, it can have a fatal outcome. There are some other abnormalities also of a congenital coronary origin abnormality or abnormality of the course of the proximal coronary arteries, which can also give rise to a sudden cardiac death in children, which is most often exertional. So accordingly, as per the clinical scenario, we need to evaluate and work up each patient. And most importantly, also evaluate the family members. Another thing is cardiomyopathies. So cardiomyopathies can be can have a very smoldering onset, and many a times they can present with arrhythmias, they can present with sudden cardiac death also.
Yeah, the common who requires this radial ablation intervention? Is a
Yes,
beneficial
so that is a good question. We did not touch upon that. An older child beyond say around 20 to 25 kilogram weight can be considered as a good candidate for catheter ablation of a reentrant pathway or of an ectopic focus, which is causing persistent arrhythmia, which is refractory to pharmacotherapy, or which is causing a concern in the normal day-to-day activities of that child or an adolescent. Which so in such scenarios, when the tachycardia persists even into the older age, and the child has crossed 20 to 25 kilos, we can consider them for a catheter ablation. The success rates of catheter ablations have improved remarkably over the past couple of decades, and most of them have a more than 60 to 70% chances of successful ablation.
All these questions were previously asked by Dr. Sampath Sasane sir. He is the head of department at this Terna Medical College. The
Okay,
next
sir.
question is, how long it takes to recover from a viral myocarditis? And also another question, that please list the commonly seen drugs induce arrhythmias, is asked by the Vice President of Raigada IP. This is Dr. Chitra Kulkarni, senior
So
pediatrician.
thank you, madam, for the question. So viral myocarditis recovery is a very it is difficult to pinpoint and say an exact period from where there is a recovery from viral myocarditis. Like all viral illnesses and human body's response to any viral infection, there is a variable response seen among individuals. So we many a times see patients who recover within a week, and many a times we see patients who go on having symptoms for much more and many more weeks, and have poor ventricular function, arrhythmias going on for a longer time. The other part is commonly seen drug-induced arrhythmias. So what we see commonly is some of the drugs are notorious for causing QT segment prolongation, and they should be avoided to take more than one such drug together. So that is one aspect where it causes QT segment prolongation and causes an arrhythmia by causing a degeneration to ventricular tachycardia. IV Zithromax, yeah, so that is one of the common things. Azithromycin does cause some degree of QT prolongation, but most often what we see is when we have seen such a significant prolongation of the QT interval, most of the times the IV azithromycin is ongoing along with another QT prolonging drug, and only single IV azithromycin as a single agent causing QT prolongation in the routine doses which we use in pediatrics is very, very unusual.
Yes, we're at the end of questions. Thank you very much. And I think I hand over this again, Ingrid madam, please, and our secretary. Thanksgiving, thank you very much. And
Yeah, thank you so much.
It was a wonderful session.
Thank you so much, everybody. I am just I'm at a loss of words to thank all of you. Such senior pediatricians have taken out time and ensured that we have a good session here. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, sir.